Good morning.
Morning.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious God, you declare your power in showing justice and mercy. Grant us the fullness of your grace that we, running to obtain your promises, may become partakers of your heavenly treasure. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Here's the deal. Yesterday afternoon, I'm in Boston in a car heading to a family funeral. I get a text from today's speaker, Paul Chow, writing, "I'm in the ER, sports injury. I can't walk or stand. I have to cancel." Everyone in the car hears my very audible sigh. What do I do now? My daughter Madeline, sitting in the way back, offers, "Call Frank Wade." I text Frank, explain the situation, and he answers, "I can help you out." Thank you, Frank Wade. By God's saving grace, I have the privilege to introduce you to Frank Wade this morning. And his topic is a hot one, Christian nationalism. Joanne, you're here. I saw Joanne over at Goodwin House when I was having lunch with Frank about a week ago. And I said I knew Frank, and she said, "Oh, I just heard this great presentation on Christian nationalism. Can you get him to come?" And I said, "He's going to come in the winter." But see, I do respond to requests. So thank you. Frank is rector emeritus at St. Alban's Episcopal Church in Washington, where the reason my daughter perked up Mercer is, Frank, you married her about 20 years ago. He served as interim dean at the National Cathedral and professor at Virginia Theological Seminary. He has a book called The Art of Being Together, which is about getting married and being together, about relationship. I have used that book probably in preparation for 100 weddings. In fact, I have kept you afloat with that book. I said, "Here," I give it out, and they never ever come back again. So, but it's a great book. And most recently, he is the author of biblical fracking, Midrash, and the modern Christian. Frank, you've been my friend for at least well over 30 years. And whenever I've had a big decision in my life and needed someone to talk things over, I called you. Actually, indeed, when I had the offer for this job, I called you and said, "What do you think?" And you said, "Take it." You helped me so thoughtfully, helped me find my way through so many things. So thank you, Frank, for a lifetime's friendship. And Carrie is also here. So it's really nice to see you here today. So thank you for being here. So Frank, welcome to Westminster.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. That's really nice. I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. Good. And I want to apologize to my Goodman House neighbors who have already heard this talk. Not much has happened since I gave it the last time, so it's pretty much like it was. So I want to talk with you all today about, as Scott said, about Christian nationalism. And it's a topic that is sort of an optical illusion in that viewed from a distance, it has a certain amount of clarity, but the closer you get, the fuzzier it is. And so it works in the opposite of most things that we look at. If you begin to think, well, okay, Christian nationalism, obviously a key word is Christian. And you say, all right, okay, I've got that. But the fact is that there has been no large, widespread agreement about the meaning of Christian since the 15th century. And that's a long time. And so when you say Christian, you haven't exactly said one thing, you've entered into the spread of things. And that figures into this dealing with Christian nationalism. Then the other is nationalism itself. Nationalism is an understanding that one's nation, because it'll apply to any nation, that one's nation is exceptional, that it stands apart and carries a particular and special role in the world and in the world's history. When you put the word Christian with it, then you're asking for a theological interpretation of that nationalism. And so what you get is the idea that God has chosen this country for a particular role, and that God has chosen the followers of Jesus Christ to play a particular and privileged role in that mission on earth. So Christian nationalism is the belief that the American nation is defined by Christianity, and that the government should take active steps to keep it that way. And this gets me to there are some there who would say that what this means is the establishment of a state church, that Christianity or a church would be the state church. And that allows me to fulfill an ambition that has been mine for over 70 years. And some of you may identify with this, but when I was in junior high, that's the 70-year spread. When I was in junior high, it was solemnly declared to us and widely accepted that the longest word in the English language, did you all get this? Do you know what the word is? What is it? All right, yes it is, anti-disestablishmentarianism. And so it was a big thing when you're in junior high, learn how to spell it and all that kind of stuff. Well, my career has been talking. I talk for a living. And I have been waiting forever to use that in a sentence, and it allows me to do it right now, because the people who would want a state church their position is anti-disestablishmentarianism, because they are opposed to the disestablishment of the state church. It is a thrill for me personally, and I'm glad to be able to say that. So you have, some people now, Christian nationalism is not one thing. So there are people, who want this and that and the other thing about it, but there are the anti-disestablishmentarianism. I'll use that word as often as I possibly can. Part of what goes on. But the problem is that since Christianity lacks a single coherent definition, then the people who hold the position of identifying Christianity for the world have to rely on force to make it happen. And now the conversation begins to get a little dark, because my view of Christianity and your view of Christianity might be different, but if I have the power, then I make my view the one that lasts. And so that's where you begin to pick up the dark side, because Christianity, lacking a single definition, must ultimately rely on force to have one of its definitions imposed on the rest of the country. And so the picture of the moral police in Afghanistan or in Saudi Arabia or something like that comes into mind. Somebody who will come around and say, well, you behave this way and that way, and you got to do this and that. So Christian nationalism also maintains that Christians are entitled to primacy of place in the public square in the United States in this business, because Christians are the heirs of the true and essential heritage of the American culture. That's their view. And that Christians have a presumptive right to define the meaning of the American experiment, because they are themselves the architects, the first citizens, and the guardians of that understanding. Now you see that what's happening is that it gets to be a narrower and narrower view. It almost always, without admitting it, hinges on a concept of white male supremacy. And that's a constant theme that runs through this. Now, one of the representations of that, there is such a thing as the Christian Liberty Party, very small, you can't find it, but they're there, they exist. And their party platform sets forth the Christian nationalist, a Christian nationalist view. It reads this way: we, the Christian Liberty Party, therefore appeal to the grace of the Lord God as the creator, preserver, and ruler of the universe. We acknowledge the fallen condition of the human race and look to Jesus Christ as our only hope for personal and cultural salvation. We appeal to him for wisdom, guidance, boldness, compassion, and endurance as we seek to restore America to her godly heritage. Now, I would say that wouldn't be a bad thing for a prayer group at Westminster or at my church, Emmanuel Church on the Hill. We believe this, but it doesn't quite play out over the country. It's not where we are as a country, and that's part of the problem with it. So you've got this extreme view. It's a very narrow view, and one that has to be physically enforced in order to be realistic in the world. And you could easily write it off as extreme. And you got to remember that every conservative is not a Christian nationalist. It's an extreme view, any more than every liberal is a communist. That would be a set apart. So you could easily write Christian nationalism off as an extreme view that's not worthy of our time or the press time or the airtime that it gets in our country now. It is constitutionally corrupt, politically hopeless, historically suspect, theologically malignant, and not widely held. They said, well, why are we talking about it? Why are people talking about Christian nationalism? Why is it being discussed? And that touches another level of our common life. And with a tip of the hat to Tom Clancy and the title of one of his novels, one of the reasons that it is so important is that it represents the sum of all fears. These are the things that we're afraid of in this country. It fears, conservative fears, liberal fears, that's what makes it important. It touches us at another level. The idea of somebody with an AK-47 and camouflage pants coming up and telling us how to behave on the streets of Alexandria, that's scary. And there are people who would be ready to do that. So the people who are drawn to the Christian nationalist point of view understand that Christianity is under siege. They see Muslims, or they see disinterested people with atheists, that they see America as being morally adrift at best, or going over a cliff at worst. They understand themselves to be involved in spiritual warfare of the kind that the New Testament describes, the apocalyptic struggles. They also sense very strongly replacement of white people by other people and replacement of males by other people. They're afraid of the implications of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're afraid of all the things that you might gather around the word liberal. That's the people who are drawn to Christian nationalism. The people who are repelled by Christian nationalism have a fear of right-wing conspiracies, somehow seeing the Christian equivalent of Sharia law come into our country, a repressive state church, which, because I just want to say it, would be pro-disestablishmentarianism as opposed to anti-disestablishmentarianism. We are afraid of unorganized militias enforcing religious law and all things conservative. And so this idea about Christian nationalism, while in and of itself, when you look at it, is kind of impossible to define, would be impossible to have, represents the sum of all fears. And it gathers the things that frighten us around it. And that's what makes it a topic. And that fear of the other touches the abortion debates, artificial intelligence, in vitro fertilization, posting the 10 Commandments in courts and in schools, gun control, library books, the declining role of organized religion, and so on and so on. It touches the conversations that are worthy for us to consider, and they make us difficult. So what I want to do is slow down a little bit, because it would be so easy just to say, well, this is an extreme point of view. We really don't need to think about it. You know, this is the fringe, and we wouldn't like these people if they were here anyway. So we don't care about them. And so there's nothing there to do, and it represents our fears, and we don't want to deal with that. But I think there are some questions in here that are legitimate questions for us to consider as a people, as a community of faith. And the first has to do with white male supremacy. That's one of the hinge principles of Christian nationalism. White male supremacy. And that's been an idea that's been around for centuries. And one of the facts is that white males are losing and have been losing authority and presence on the stage of our common life over the years. Have been losing prestige, been losing place. Now, because for centuries, white males were the only players on the stage. And now there's a whole lot of other players on the stage. There are people of color, and there are women, and there are people of different sexualities and all sorts of things like that. And so where you've been the only person on the stage, now all of a sudden there are lots of people on the stage, and that represents a loss of place, of prestige, of presence. And now you could say easily and rightly that the white male role has been grossly out of proportion, and that it needs to be diluted. I would agree with that, and I'm a white male, so I agree with that. I think that that's right. But the reality is lost, the loss of prestige. If you didn't have a chance this morning in the book world today, in the paper, there is a review of a book titled "Stolen Pride: Loss, Shame, and the Rise of the Right." This study is based in Eastern Kentucky. It's not far from where I come from. In Eastern Kentucky, and it's about a slice of Appalachia, and about the difficulty of maintaining pride among the people of that area and that community, because it feels stolen, because there's nothing to be proud of, and everything has been taken away from it. It touches on this particular piece. Another article not too long ago that male suicides, 40,000 males a year commit suicide in this country. I mean, this loss of, so it's not a minor demographic point. So the point that I want to raise that I think is worthy of discussion: are white males losing prestige? Yes. I think the answer to that is yes. These books, the other things point to it. And that's a prime motivator of Christian nationalism. Second point: should white males be losing prestige? Yes, I would say yes. And since I'm teaching the class, yes is the answer. But then the question that I think is worthy of our thinking and discussion: so how do we respond to people who are experiencing loss, even if we think they should be experiencing that loss? Because even though we might judge, yes, you shouldn't be. The world should not be run by white males. It should be run by lots of voices from lots of places. I would sign on to that. But for the people who experience that as loss, the question becomes, how do you respond to people who are experiencing loss? And the first response that I hear, and frankly, the first response that I feel, is one of ridicule. You deserve it. It ought to be more people on the stage. Just, suck it up. Just do it. Get going. Do something else. As the story about Eastern Kentucky shows, there's not always a something else right there to do. So how do we respond to people who are experiencing loss? Ridicule is probably not the answer. So how do we respond? That's the first question. They're here, they're us, they're experiencing loss, no matter how we would look at that loss. How do we respond to people who are experiencing loss? That's the first question. Second question comes from the point about America and faith. Are we a Christian nation? Well, what makes a nation or anything else Christian? That's pretty unclear. We kind of lost the handle on that in the 15th century. So we're not, not quite sure what that would be. And people will look to the, to the originators, the founding fathers, and all that sort of thing. And they were Christians for the most part. They were deists, which is a Christian heresy. And the point is that Christian precepts were the language, the lingua franca of the 18th century. So there's a lot of Christian terminology in our founding and what puts us together. But does that make us a Christian nation? Well, I would suggest that it does not make us a Christian nation by any standard that would withstand a thoughtful scrutiny. But then what would be important about being a Christian nation? What would you gain? And so here's a question, here's the point here. Freedom, which is an enormously important word to us in our country. Freedom requires a moral framework. And if it doesn't have a moral framework, then freedom turns into license on the individual level and anarchy on the corporate level. So we have freedom, we're very proud about that, but what are the moral limits of that freedom? At what point do we define that? Our government, our system of governance is not very good at providing the moral framework for human liberty. Well, then where do we get it? How do we know? How do we know? Where do we know the limits of our freedom? It's part of the abortion debate. It's part of capital punishment. It's very much involved in issues of gun control. We lack a cohesive moral understanding. So how do we frame our freedom so that we avoid license and anarchy? Not a form of Christian Sharia law. Okay, we know that's not a good idea. But what is a good idea? How do we provide a moral framework for the exercise of human freedom? The third question that I would say is worthy of, that comes out of this Christian nationalism phenomenon, has to do with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, because they are touchstones in the debate. And you know that a lot of people are bringing up lawsuits. We're not going to have DEI here, so you can't do that. It's a bad thing, and and all that. Now, when you look closely at DEI, the first word is diversity. Well, diversity is a demographic fact. You can't say I don't want it. I'm sorry, it's here. It's like humidity. It's here. You might want to do something about it, but you can't say it's not there. So diversity is a demographic fact. We are diverse. Equity is enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and in the religious traditions throughout our land. There are not religious traditions in our land that do not affirm equity. That is, God's care and compassion for all people, does not give license to treat people differently. So that the only real word in this that's left out open to debate is inclusion. And so inclusion is the key. And here's where it comes into us now. The Christian nationalists would say that what inclusion means is that if you want to join us, then you got to be like us. You cannot be a Laotian American. You got to stop being Laotian and be American like I am. You're going to be a Norman Rockwell American. You're going to fit that picture. And so there's a view of inclusion, that what inclusion means is that you got to stop being what you were and come and be what I am. That's one view of inclusion. Another view of inclusion is that our evolution as a people is a continuous process, and that when we when we include you, we are made different by that inclusion. I used to say to the greeters and whatnot in the churches that I serve, that if somebody says, you know, I've never been here before, hello, I'm welcome to Westminster, and they say, I've never been here before, that the response you ought to hear in the back of your head is, neither have I, because I've never been here when you were here. If you're going to make it, I want you to make it. Maybe, of course, you don't say that because they think you're stupid if you say a greeter, but you need to understand that we want, when you come, we are made different by your presence. And that's another understanding of inclusion. Christian nationalists would maintain that no, if you come, if you're included, then you're going to come and be my view of this, my Christian view, my enforced view that they have. The other view is we will be made different by your coming. And so the question becomes, what are the implications of inclusion in a diverse society that is committed to equity? What are the implications of that for us? Does it mean that the included will conform to a body already formed? Or are they catalysts in a body that continues to be formed? Those questions, I think, are worthy that can grow out of this debate. So the questions that I think are in this, it's not whether Christian nationalism is a good idea or a bad idea. I would suggest to you it is a bad idea. And if you wanted it as a good idea, then you would find yourself in a politically hopeless situation because it's not going to fly constitutionally, historically, any other way. When you get, as I said, you know, if you look at it closely, it's an impossible idea, you know, just to make real. Even if it were a good idea, it would be an impossible idea. But then, well, we got all this fuss and feathers that's going on around it. So what is in this debate? Well, one is it's all the things we're afraid of. It's the sum of all fears. And then from that, some questions specifically. The people who are experiencing loss, the loss of white male supremacy, how do we respond to them in our community? The other question, the second question is, how do we provide or find or establish or maintain a moral framework for the exercise of human freedom? And the third question is, how do we understand inclusion? Is inclusion part of a continuous process of being changed and made different? Or is it forcing people into what we have been in the past? So those are really easy questions, and you all can take them, and we'll do that. We've got some time here and to talk about that. So let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. Yes, sir.
You have hit a lot of my buttons, but
I was aiming for someone.
One of them is certainly Christian nationalism. I'm sitting here because of Christian nationalism, which was embodied in Lutheran Germany, where the Lutheran Church was the state and the state was the church. And they decided that anti-baptism was a capital offense. So my Mennonite Amish ancestors came here in the 1700s because staying in Europe, they were being killed by the Lutherans. That is an example.
Yes, sir, it is.
Of Christian nationalism.
It is.
But on a more positive note, I've been devoting most of my senior years to developing and promoting the idea that love is an appropriate center, philosophical center for all world religions. And I've created a number of scholarships at schools, including Virginia Theological and one at UVA about to birth. And I've written and sing. I'll be singing one here October 13 at the 8:30 service. My version of the Statue of Liberty song.
Great.
which has a new third verse. Which enshrines this idea. I think this really is the call of the moment for the world. I mean, this is what we have to do.
Well,
if we're going to get ourselves out of the swamp.
Well, I think you're right. I certainly agree with you. You know, my background is the Church of England, which certainly has its fingerprints all over the state church understanding and all some of the things that go with that. And so I can appreciate that. And the alternative, I think you're right, that love, but love it too, like Christian nationalism is a word that wants defined. You got to know what it means. That, and we as a people, you know, I don't know your course. I'm not. We won't get into all that, but you know, even when you say that centerpiece is love, you're exactly right. That's what holds it all together. But then that too wants its definition. The Greeks had 4 words for it. We've only got one. We've got one word, and it describes everything from how we feel about God to how we feel about potato chips. And it's a little overworked, you know, and it doesn't actually mean much when you hold it up. So that too wants development, and I'm glad that you're working to do that. That's great. I think that's certainly a good place to go. And if you say that love provides the moral framework, you know, for our freedoms, that's true. But then you got to know what that means. So and so that I'm really glad you're doing it. It's great. Thank you, sir. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
2 things. One, if folks haven't seen it, I've only seen part. It was a long sermon. It's not a Presbyterian sermon. It's like, you know, almost 30 minutes, and I got to 10, and I was like, well, there's my attention span. But there's a gentleman in Texas, James Tallarico, who preached a wonderful sermon on Christian nationalism and breaks it down really in a wonderful way. One of the things that he said that struck me is that Jesus wouldn't have wanted nationalism. I think that he was a rogue person trying to break things up. And I just thought that was a really interesting thing to think about, what we're putting on a movement, if you will, that went against all of those kinds of things. And then the other thing that I really enjoyed was what you just said about the DE&I, the I being the catalyst. And then I would just stretch folks to think about the B that comes after that with belonging.
Yeah.
So if you're inviting people in and you want them to be a catalyst and a new entity, I'm experiencing this for the first time because you're here,
Right.
Then how do you help them belong in community as the catalyst?
And that's a really good question. And I think that one of the principles behind that is that in a major endeavor, like making our society work or making Westminster Church work or whatever, that good questions are more powerful than good answers. That people who are wondering, how can I include? How can I understand you? Will be a whole lot more powerful than the person who says, I can do that by looking you in the eye and say, it's nice to see you, and you know, that, which is a very nice thing to do, but the answer kills the edge of it. And so that I think the question is the powerful thing. And the people who are asking, how can I include? How can I welcome? How can I let you belong? All those sorts of things. Those questions are powerful, and they empower people to do. And I heard a good speaker, a preacher about Christian nationalism, and you know, I don't know if it's the same one. If the one that bothered me was that this person's understanding of Christian nationalism was everybody who was more conservative than he was, which seemed like, well, that's a handy stick, but it's not a very good one to judge your way through.
This is
But
pretty biblically grounded.
and look at that, when you get to the biblical part of it, you know, that the Hebrew scriptures are very much nationalistic. You know, it's God chose a people, and it's these people and the Jebusites and all those folks. You know, you wipe your feet on them on your way to someplace else. You know, and it's very clearly nationalistic. As you point out, the message of Jesus is internationalistic, or whatever, out of those barriers. And that's different. We are Christians, we view it that way. And that's a missing piece of the Christian nationalism. The connecting Christian with nationalism, is not, they just don't want to go together like magnets, we're used to do that sort of thing. They don't want to go together. Yes, ma'am.
Do the Christian nationalists think that they're better than all other human beings? Like the,
Well, I secretly do, but I
Muslim or Chinese
they,
religion person or what?
well, again, that Christian nationalism is not a well-defined group. As a matter of fact, the people who are most identified with it rarely use that term. It's most often used by people who are outside of that group. So it's not like you get a card that says, I'm a Christian nationalist, and you could pull that. But thinking generally about that and honoring your question, it is their belief that Christians are privileged in this world. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody else is, dirt.
They don't believe in it. What is it, DEI?
No, they don't go for that. That's a big problem. because that has them including people they don't want to include, which are non-Christians and other things. So they're not too keen on DEI. And so you hear that it is a Christian nationalist theme they're not all Christian. It's hard to define a Christian nationalist, but they're Christian nationalist themes. Christian nationalists would applaud the idea that DEI is taken out of college admissions and other things like that.
Who did that?
Who did that? I don't know. It's not any one person who does that. But
it was recently put through that you couldn't use DEI in interim colleges anymore.
Right. Yeah, it's a college. I think a college admission is one thing. A church is another. I live in Goodwin House. Goodwin House is another. How do you do this in any corporate setting? I think there's a particular set of issues around college admissions that, frankly, I don't understand. But that's part of it, and that's one of the things that the idea, of inclusion of others, and letting them still be other, is very bad news to the Christian nationalist way of thinking, and so it supports them. That makes sense? Maybe. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, it seems unlikely that inclusion is going to really happen of people of other faiths coming into this particular faith community. We used to have ecumenical services, and we were doing a lot by going around. And then, so if you accept that, and then the growing body of people who have no religious faith at all, how do you find that moral framework, and how do we find inclusion?
Well, it's a really important question for us as a country, because I think we are seeking that, or suffering for the want of having that. I think Westminster has every right, to say, well, we're Presbyterians, and so that's what we do. You got to kind of sign on to that to be here. I'm an Episcopal priest. That's what I said in the Episcopal churches I serve. So that's, I think for faith communities to do that, we cooperate with other people. We're not, burning down churches next door or mosques, but we cooperate. But you have a definition. I think it's right to hold that definition, and I think that's a very, very good thing. Then the question of how does a country have a moral framework? I don't know. If I knew, I'd be famous and you wouldn't know me. I wouldn't be here. So but the thing is that the loss of, the loss of prestige of the Christian community in the conversation in our country is partly the fault of the Christian community, because we frittered it away, and then there are a lot of other factors that we could talk about, but we would be one source of that. And one of the facts is where I think we have failed, and where that dynamic has failed between the churches, not just Presbyterians, but everybody, the faith communities. Societies create repositories for their values. So we value healthcare, so we support hospitals, and we give them a tax exempt status, and we think law is a good thing, so we pay for police officers and the courts and all that, and we make a repository for our respect for law. We do that with education. Churches enjoy a tax exempt status because we have value in the society. What is that value? Well, the value that we have in that deal is that we are the people who understand mystery, or at least hold the story of people dealing with that which is larger than themselves. And that when we do that well, then what we're saying to the culture is that, here's the mystery of what precedes birth and follows death. And what precedes birth is a root for ultimate purpose in life. And what follows death is a root for ultimate hope in life. And so we are accountable for giving our culture and holding for our culture the tools that allow people access to purpose and hope by that mystery. That's our role. That's one expression of our role. The fact that our country is suffering from what are called despair deaths, is a failure of our failure to provide that leadership. The fact that our principles, love, and as we understand it, has not been shared with our culture, that's a burden that the church has, of being able to say, wait a minute, this is how you think about it. This is where individual freedom and corporate responsibility meet. Okay, this is the place. So the father down there in Georgia, where you exceeded your individual freedom by giving this troubled young man, a gun. The law said that, but we should be helping to draw those lines too. We're not doing it. So I think that there's a failure of not I'm not holding up Presbyterians in Westminster, but the church as a whole in our society have failed in what society expects of us, which is purpose and hope. And we're not delivering that. And I think that's part of the conversation. I think we've failed at that. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I had her there. You spoke. Let me go to this young lady over here. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to really build off of what you just shared about how maybe we as church communities across the United States have failed to offer an alternative vision for these young people, because specifically in young white men, we see a huge disparity from young white women in terms of beliefs, political views, and it's growing every year. And I know for Ian and I as young people, when we tried to find a church here in Northern Virginia, we wanted to stay in the denominations that we grew up in, but it's very difficult to find community. There's very few young adults that go to traditional denominational churches these days.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's a lack of accountability in a lot of those non-denominational churches, where I know I experienced this in college, where I was told, oh yeah, we're super welcoming. But it turns out when you dig into their beliefs, they're not affirming. And they actually hold views that I would say lean further towards Christian nationalism or a more right-wing view of what Christianity is. But those are the churches that seem to be attracting lots of young people every single year. I know many of the other people that I do know that go to church tend to go to those non-denominational churches whose finances or theological views might be a little cloudy.
Yeah.
And I would say it's just very challenging right now as a young person to find traditional denominational churches where there's accountability in beliefs, but there's also a sense of community. We were so lucky that we landed at Westminster and found great young adult community here. But I think as denominations have these big questions about what do we do about this group of very angry, disaffected people, that a focus begins towards creating community for those young people and welcoming them in. I find there's a lot of outreach to college age young adults. They'll run shuttles to college campuses, but once they get out of college, where do they go next?
I cannot but agree with you. I think it's an issue, and it's how you end up with a community that that is welcoming and affirming and accepts its role in the wider society and the society that it creates within itself is a serious question. And that's a reason that, that clergy like Scott Plain get all the big bucks. It is exactly the right question. And I think having an arena in which that can be articulated is really important. But I don't think it has a single answer. You can't say, well, if we all got together and made taffy or something, it would work out. It isn't there. So, but it is again like the existence of the question and holding that question before you and this community, and not just the younger members, but of all ages, I think is hugely important. So thank you for putting that together. Yes, Joanne.
Well, it seems to me that what Jesus demonstrated to us while he was here on earth is very different than what Christian nationalism is showing us or trying to demonstrate. It really is a business about love and forgiveness. And maybe we should be working that framework a little deeper around those terms.
Yes, and I think the effort that this gentleman is championing is, I don't know the content of it, but I say that's the right question, and that's kind of a hinge word for us, that love is a hinge word. But there, as I said, when you said that, because of our language, you haven't said much, because it means, as I said, how you feel about God and how you feel about potato chips. It doesn't, you've got to say more about it in order to know. And it's a worthwhile subject. I
don't think you can talk about love without the essence of forgiveness within that.
No, you have to come to forgiveness. You've got to look at forgiveness.
That's dismissed a lot in this.
It is, and it's avoided, and nobody, we all live on the forgiveness of God. And that's, the Christian nationalism would say that we are privileged in this world, and we have, all that because we're Christians, and we're ahead of the race and all that sort of thing. And I just don't think that's true. And so, Christianity is a journey, and we are, our first name was the way. And we are followers of Jesus Christ. And in order to be followers of Jesus Christ, you have to first know, what is Jesus like? Because when you get into some of this Christian national stuff, you say, wait a minute, if I'm going to follow Jesus, that's not what I find. That's not it. So what is it? So you got to have some idea of what it is. Jesus said that, the sheep know my voice. They don't recognize these other folks. Well, so learn that voice. Do the following, you come to the territory that this young lady is talking about, and this gentleman's talking about, and I think that leads there. But our key has always been that we are followers of Jesus Christ, and we keep that. That's how we do it, and we're done.